Now we're ready to put the skirt together. The first thing to do is to open out one side of your placket and fold it over so the right sides are facing each other, and then we're going to close the lower edge of our placket. So across here, 1 centimeter seam allowance all the way across. Just feed the next one straight in. There we go. Now I'm going to work out my edge and then press it. Other side as well. Now I'm also going to turn over the edge of my hem. It doesn't have to be 1 centimeter, it can be less than that. It doesn't really matter as long as it's even all the way across. Pin your placket to the front edge with pins vertical to the seam, and then you just roll your hem up. Make sure it's tucked in really tightly. And then all we have to do is sew down the front edge and then turn it, and we've got our hem sewn in really nicely. I do the same on the other side. Let's do this again. Put the pins in so they stand vertical to the seam that you're going to sew in a minute. Roll over your seam allowance really tightly. Another pin. There we go, over to the sewing machine, and we're going to now stitch this in with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Lock in your stitches as per usual. Stitch length needs to be back down to 2.5. And then you overlock it. I'm cutting off a little bit here just to make it nice and neat. My knife's back in action. And now all I have to do is pull out that placket, and look what a wonderful edge I'm getting. It's very, very professional. It's how a lot of stuff is actually done when you look at industrial sewing. If you don't know this, I am a trained tailor, but I've worked in industrial manufacture for quite a while, so I've learned a few tricks. Now I'm going to go back to the sort of tailoring side of things. The people with a lot of experience will not have to pin this and measure it, but if you're doing a skirt for the first time or you've just started sewing, you really should measure this and then pin it. And everyone that knows how to sew, I've been sewing for years, you know where 2 centimeters are, and you can go straight on your sewing machine and hem it. Here I'm pinning it really neatly, as you would when you're just starting. First I'm going to do the front edge, so the seam allowance of my placket is going straight into the skirt. And don't forget, the stitch length needs to be extended again to 3.5. And come down the other side. Don't forget to lock in your stitches. I did, but I somehow cut that off the footage. It looks like I'm just going straight over. Now I'm going to do the hem, and I just do it from the placket, not from the front. I think that looks not so nice. And you can move out the pins as you go, but because they are vertical to the seam, you can leave them in as well. What that sometimes does, it leaves little loops underneath it where you have the pin and where the thread needed to go over it. Now on my electronic machine, it doesn't really do that. It does sew very, very well. So I don't need to take the pins out, but as you can see here, I kind of sometimes do and sometimes don't. But yeah, you can take them out if you're worried about little loops underneath it. Now I'm just giving it a very good press so that it's nice and flat. Doing your ironing all the way through is really important because it gives you a very nice product when you're finished with it. And especially if you're making something that's a little bit more complicated than a skirt, that's very important. Once it's ironed, you check that the front edges are exactly the same length. And if they're not, mine were like 2 millimeters out, please cut it off so they're the same length. So when you put the skirt onto the waistband and use the right seam allowance, they will line up perfectly. Now we're going to add the gather threads, and that means with the longest stitch available, you go along the edge of your skirt and you do one which is sort of a little bit less than presser foot width, and then you do another stitching line right next to that one, and that's presser foot width, so that when we sew the waistband and the skirt together, it will be exactly on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and your ruffles will be really, really even. And that's it. Now we can get on with our waistband.